I'm sure everybody has heard about the massacres of civilians, mostly Alawites and Christians in the coastal provinces of, especially Latakia, the hometown of Assad. Yeah, it's horrible. There are many videos out there, and the reason that the videos are out there is that the perpetrators are are filming themselves doing this is clearly something that they take pride in. They you see torture and killing of civilians. Often young people, even teenagers and women, entire families. It's a horrible, horrible. Uh, you could say an incipient genocide, and it's something, of course, that many of us had predicted. Now, it's to say, that there have been atrocities, many atrocities since the downfall of Assad, but it just picked up pace. And the reason was this a rebellion in the coastal provinces. There were some, probably primarily ex-soldiers, attacked military bases controlled by HTS in the area, and took them over. And the response that this invited was attack on civilians. You don't see any footage of them fighting soldiers. I'm sure there's some of it out there, but they responded by launching these massacres, and it's horrifying. I can't do justice to the horror that's going on there with anything I can say right here. The response from the world has been mixed. Let's put it that way. The Sunni monarchies in the area, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, for example, have actually expressed support for the HTS, which is really the Al Qaeda government there. And that's not too surprising. The European Union has, maybe not quite expressed support, but refused to condemn, clearly failed to condemn the massacres. They actually pointed to pro-Assad elements as somehow being responsible for this. And they stated that the HTS Al-Qaeda government had the right to respond. So then they added some sort of very vague statement about there shouldn't be attacks on civilians, but it was a very mealy-mouthed, response. There was no condemnation. There no condemnation of the HTS government whatsoever. This came from the moral superpower, of course, the EU, which is in close alliance with Al Qaeda and with Banderite neo-Nazi elements in Ukraine. I still have trouble getting my head wrapped around that, but that's just true. That's the new EU. Now, interestingly, though, both the United States and, not surprisingly, of course, Russia condemned. And Russia did more. Actually, Russia has admitted thousands of terrified civilians into their base there, the Khmeimim base, and are protecting them and sheltering them there. But the United States actually also condemned the HTS government. And Russia and the U.S. jointly have, called a UN Security Council meeting on it. So that's interesting. That's something new. Again, that would not have happened under Joe Biden. It would have been, the U.S. would probably pretty much echoed the EU on this, which is to say they would have failed to condemn it. Well, probably, because another country that condemned these massacres was Israel. And I don't think they really have any concern about Alawites or Christians, but they're happy to condemn the HTS government, in spite of every effort by the HTS government to make nice with Israel, constantly praising Israel, saying Israel's our friend. Israel, is not interested in having the Al Qaeda as their friend. They're very happy that they're in power because they know that they're much weaker and much easier to attack than Assad. So I think as part of, you have to look at the broader Israeli strategy. They have essentially declared all of southern Syria as some kind of security zone. They have simply taken, a buffer zone along the border from the Golan Heights and south, all along the border up to, to north of the Golan Heights, and they have established military bases. They have seized that land, and then some. I think approximately like 50 miles out from the Israeli border and the Lebanese border, they're declaring that is an area where they will not allow any HTS military to enter. And then beyond that, the rest of southern Syria is off limits to any long-range weapons of HTS. So they have declared their control in varying degrees over all of southern Syria. And so anyway, that's where we are, as the horror continues in, I think the latest statement I saw that at least 1,500 civilians have been killed. We don't really know. This was from a Syrian human rights organization. And, maybe they have good information. We have seen many massacres, from the videos again that these jihadis have been uploading, but that just has to be the tip of the iceberg.
So who are these HTS individuals, these perpetrators? Are they Syrians themselves, or are these...
I think the vast majority are not Syrians. My understanding is that they are Chechens, Tajikis, Uyghurs from China. They're largely Central Asians. So they are foreigners that are carrying out. We knew that they were there, that they were part of the army that brought about the downfall of Assad.
So what motivates these people? Why are they coming to Syria to do this if they're not from Syria themselves? This isn't their homeland.
Right.
What's driving them?
Yeah, they are. You can describe them as takfiris. What a takfiri is, let's say, a Sunni fundamentalist that believes that, if you don't adhere to what they regard as a pure form of Islam, dating back to the very first century of Islam, then you are not even a Muslim. And so, Christians and Alawites clearly are beyond the pale, but they take it even farther. I imagine you could be a takfiri and not be particularly violent, but these are jihadis. They actually believe that it is their duty, to kill the infidels. And the Alawites, they are a sect, of Islam, but they certainly are not part of mainstream Islam. They're neither Sunni or Shia, but they treat the Shia the same way too. And many of the Sunnis, it has to be remembered that actually many of the Sunnis in Syria are not takfiris. They are not. And some of the violence that has been perpetrated by HTS has been directed against Sunnis, including Sunni clerics who have spoken out against this. But there is this, we have to be, sometimes, when we're talking about the geopolitical situation, we talk about the, Western hegemony versus the multipolar world. And that's very important. But when you're looking at Syria, you have to go beyond that. Part of the problem is not just that conflict. Clearly, it is part of it. I mean, I think that in all likelihood, the Assad government would not have fallen if it wasn't for the U.S. and its policy of starving Syria, seizing its, oil resources, its wheat fields. The Assad government might still be there, and those religious minorities would still be protected if you were there. So the U.S., obviously, in general, the West, because Europe was very much a part of this, is in part to blame. But there is this violent current, within Sunni Islam that is there, and which Turkey backed, and that army that actually that caused the collapse of the Assad government was a jihadi army, and that's what drives them. It is this notion that we saw, again with both ISIS and Al Qaeda, and the leaders of this movement. Let's not forget Jolani. He was actually both an ISIS leader and an Al-Qaeda leader. That's where he comes from. He was a deputy to al-Baghdadi, I'm probably mispronouncing his name, Baghoudi, I think it is, who was the head of ISIS. He was a deputy, he had a kind of like the vice president, though, that's not the terminology that they use. And he was named the head of Syria. He was the head of al-Nusra, which was really the Al-Qaeda, the Syrian branch of Al-Qaeda. So, and it's not just him, but I think like the second command has a very similar background. So we are talking about, we are talking about jihadis without qualification, of the most violent and extreme sort. These are the people that run Syria. And they actually showed some restraint early on because I think they understood their need for international support. But just some, there have been a lot of massacres prior to the massacres in Latakia and the coastal areas. But now we're seeing more clearly, the true face of this government.
So these Takfaris are people from Saudi Arabia, Qatar. You said that they are supporting HTS. Are they Takfaris as well?
The ones that are supporting it. Yeah, because it is. This movement really springs from Saudi Arabia, is my understanding. The Wahhabi sect in Saudi Arabia, and so of course we got Bin Laden coming out of Saudi Arabia. Now not every Saudi Arabian is a Takfiri. Let's understand that. Much less every Sunni. Many. I think probably the great majority of Sunnis do not support this. But it does exist, and it does have this movement does have support, considerable support in places like Saudi Arabia, and Turkey less so. But Turkey is kind of undergoing a transformation under Erdogan, because Erdogan, I think it's clear that he is not an open, Takfiri or jihadi. He's too sophisticated for that. I think that he clearly favors them. This army that he put together was an army of jihadis, and I think he has that in my understanding his family background has always been linked to them. So I think that he is in essence, one of them, and under his rule, and because of the many refugees that flowed into Syria during the civil war in Syria, not into Syria, but rather into Turkey during the civil war in Syria. Many of those came from the northern provinces and were supporters of the jihadis, of the insurgency against Assad, and they have. Their presence in Turkey has had an effect on Turkish politics and Turkish culture, Turkish religion, and it seems to be. I'm getting this from Professor Morandi from Iran, but that he has noticed a real change over the years. That it used to be like when he went to Turkey, he felt like though there are Sunnis and he's Shia, they were both Sufis, which is a kind of an interpretation of Islam that you find both among Sunnis and Shias, and which emphasizes the mystical. And so he found that he had a lot of common ground, but he's noticed a difference. Like there's a hardening, a trending away from Sufism towards the Takfiri point of view. It would be a mistake to say that Turkey is ruled by Takfiris or is a Takfiri society, but it seems to be trending in that direction, according to Professor Morandi.
So what we're seeing in Syria, do you believe that this is just the beginning? Are we going to see a larger humanitarian crisis unfold, or is it we see a cessation? Well, how do you see this playing out?
Well, I think there's a great danger of it. I mean, the only thing that might put the brakes, and I think has put the brakes on, all-out genocide in Syria, is the concern about an international reaction. Now, you saw a very muted and actually really a non-reaction from Europe, so that had to be encouraging. But there was a condemnation from the U.S. and, of course, from Russia. I think that was expected by everybody. And and he has to consider that. The sanctions, the economic sanctions, haven't been lifted, uh, and so Al Jawlani, Al Shara, he's going by different names these days. The leader of the of Syria does have to. He seems to be. He's an intelligent man. He's clearly an extremist, a very violent man. A head chopper, but he understands the need to gain some kind of international support. For his own survival. So that may put the brakes on it, and but overall, it's a terrible, terrible situation. Now, in the south, the Israelis are taking control, direct control over part of the south, and indirect control over the rest of it. And their strategy seems to be to actually what we see them doing is try to develop relationships with the Druze communities there, and to use them as proxies. And this furthers, they can at least be, at best they can be proxies for them, can actually do the will of Israel. Now, if the Jews don't go that far, they can at least, Israel can build them up as a separate enclave and therefore bring about the Balkanization, begin the Balkanization of Syria. That's something that they've always favored. So if, a united Syria was a problem for them. It presented, was a focal point of the resistance. But if Syria can be Balkanized, so you have, this Druze enclave and that Druze enclave, and over there an Alawite enclave or a Shia enclave, that's a much weaker Syria, and they can, play them off against each other and maintain control. That's maybe the strategy that we're looking at in southern Syria, and then eventually, that. Again, there are Israelis that, when their notion of greater Israel actually extends all the way to Damascus. So this is, for them, it's a step in that direction. Eventually having direct control over all of southern Syria and even Damascus.
Why is Europe failing to condemn what's happening in Syria?
Well, they were so deeply invested in Assad is evil and Assad must go. It's kind of a problem. Okay, you finally got your wish. He's gone. And now are these horrible massacres. And I think rather than admit that they were wrong about this, they've got to look the other way and spin it. This is because, again, they're the moral superpower, and the moral superpower it's a moral superpower that's all about really fantasy. It's about narrative. And we got to maintain the narrative that we're always in the right. I know that's a very cynical interpretation, but I think it's correct.
Were you kind of surprised to see that the U.S. was condemning Assad, or do you feel like because Tulsi Gabbard is now DNI that made a big difference?
Yeah, I think potentially, right. It could have been that Tulsi Gabbard was behind this, because she has been very forthright. She has been unapologetic about her criticism of U.S. policy in Syria. And she, like during the hearings, there's areas where she has abandoned, stepped back and compromised severely, like in the case of Israel. But on Syria, she hasn't, and she was very blunt and met the criticisms head on during the congressional hearing, where she was being considered for the DNI office. And so, I think that she's clearly had an impact and must have some support from Trump too, I think, Trump has always been unenthusiastic about the U.S. intervention in Syria. So I'm not entirely surprised by it. And I'm very pleased by it. That, again, that is a positive sign. That's good that happened.
Can Russia or the United States, or jointly Russia and the United States, that would be great to see, do anything to solve this humanitarian crisis?
That's a tough one. I think they're talking about, the hope is actually to get peacekeepers in there and to protect the civilian population. But without, we'll see, if the entire Security Council comes down, on the side of Russia and the U.S., then that may just force the hand of the HTS government. But you have the HTS government, maybe they don't amount to very much. They're very weak. They're very good at killing civilians, but they're actually a very weak um, force there. But you have Turkey, and Turkey, I think, does not want to see any international forces there. And in fact, I've heard that Turkey was rushing their troops to the area. I'm not accusing Turkey of participating in the massacres of civilians, but they're probably trying to retake the bases that were taken by the insurgents there.
Well, isn't he the one that put al-Jilani in control of Syria?
Yeah,
Isn't he behind
right.
him?
Yeah.
So does that mean, does Erdogan control al-Jilani?
I think he does. Yeah. And, I think it's probably near total control. He's almost completely dependent on al-Jilani's almost completely dependent on Erdogan.
So if we want to change things, then the pressure should be put on Turkey, right? Should be put on Erdogan more than anybody, right? Because it's not, it sounds like al-Jilani is just this puppet of Erdogan, and Erdogan's playing this weird game. I don't know. Is his vision, his idea to recreate the Ottoman Empire? Is that what he's...
Yeah, everyone suspects of him then, I think rightly. I think he wants to simply take at least part of Syria. And he has, in fact. I mean, there are parts of northern Syria that are under direct Turkish control, just, again, which is similar to what the Israelis have done in southern Syria. So that's what we see. I mean, largely is that northern Syria is falling under Turkish control, southern Syria is falling under Israeli control. Some of it, again, direct and, pretty much annexation, even if it's not official annexation, it's de facto annexation. And then a lot of it is indirect through proxies. And we're seeing that both, from the Israelis and from the Turks. Yeah, the problem with, Turkey's behind it. You say that we should be pressuring Turkey. The thing is that Turkey, Erdogan is very crafty, and he understands how he is, how important he is to both the West and to Russia. And so both the West and Russia have to tread carefully, when they're dealing with Turkey. That Turkey has some important cards to play. Like in the case of Russia, he has control over the Bosphorus. And he has been abiding by an agreement. I guess it's really an international treaty that keeps NATO war vessels out of the Black Sea. But he could decide just not to enforce that, for example. And the Russians are aware of that. And then, of course, he is a member of NATO, and he's probably the most powerful, aside from the U.S., the most powerful member of NATO in military terms. And that's, of course, what matters when we're talking about NATO. And so they're always bickering with them, but they're careful. They do sometimes impose sanctions, but they don't take it too far because they just understand or they have a real fear of losing Turkey. And so, unfortunately, I don't think that pressure will be applied on Turkey, any meaningful pressure.
Hey, if you're paying $20 a month for AI, just stop it. Cancel your subscription and switch to Noblesky.io. Check out the pinned comment below. You get all the top AI models from OpenAI, DeepSeek, Anthropic, hundreds of models you can choose from. And the greatest thing about it, there's no rate limits, no subscription fees. So you get way more AI, and it's going to save you way more money. So check it out.
Okay, so it sounds like the outlook doesn't seem very good then for Syria, that it's likely...
Oh, no, it's terrible. I don't even like to think about it. The whole thing is such a tragedy. My heart goes out to the Syrian people. What they've gone through is this so horrible. And it just continues. Like when you think finally it's over, we've talked about that, then there's a collapse, and then everything goes from bad to worse. And it didn't have to happen. Again, you have to point to the jihadis themselves and the support they got from Turkey, but the West was also responsible, clearly was. They weakened Syria to the extent where it just didn't take much to bring about its collapse.
Yeah, this seems like a common story for us, with Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. We go in, destroy these countries, and then it becomes just a complete massive power vacuum. extremists, jihadists come in, massacres,
Yeah.
just hell on earth, and there's nothing we can do. Nothing we do about it. It's
Right.
quite infuriating just seeing it happen again and again and again play
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Millions and millions of people dead in the Middle East due to our intervention. Removing what we deem the bad guy. This hasn't worked out very well at all. I mean, there haven't been any successes in our interventions and our sanctions in the Middle East, have there?
I can't think of any. Just in the since 2000, Iraq, that's been a total disaster. And we have to say, the most rigorous studies showed that Iraq War resulted in 1 million dead, 4 million refugees, 2 million, roughly like 4.5 million, roughly half of them internally displaced, the others just left the country. The destruction of the millennia-old Christian community there. And we're seeing the same thing in Syria. It's like the end of Christianity. These are ancient communities, some of them who, actually still speak the language of Jesus, Aramaic, the most ancient Christian communities in the world. And they're gone. I mean, there's very little left of them. Many of them fled. Many of the Christians fled during the Civil War, back that started in approximately 2011. But there were still, communities that remained, and now they're being targeted and killed. And I think it's very sad, but it's a horrible tragedy. And but it looks like the end of Christianity in Syria.
Who do we blame for all this? If we go way back, is it right to say that we tie it all back to Israel and foreign policy by the United States being based on this or involvement? It's such a shame that we've just this ancient civilization, these areas have just been destroyed and wiped out. And I don't know, I want to blame somebody, but maybe that's not the way to look at it.
Right. There's it's obviously more than one group to blame. Again, we can't forget the
jihadis.
The jihadis. That's not something created by the West. That was there. But it's something that's been used by the West, where the West has actually allied themselves with those forces or used them directly. I think you have to, that Israel or just the Zionists, the pro-Israel as elements in the U.S. government played a disproportionate role, are more responsible than really any other group. Because in the end, it just doesn't even make sense from a U.S. perspective, in terms of U.S. interest to have this happen. But the Zionists have always been arguing. They put a target on Saddam Hussein. They wanted him to go. He was one of their their great rivals. They've always been after Syria. Again, we don't really have any fight with Syria, but the Zionists do. And unfortunately, the Zionists have convinced many of our people, and through various means. Sometimes it's just money, but it's more than that. Again, we've talked about all the sources of Zionist power within the U.S. There's just no question that there is that is. I would say it's really the main driving force behind these regime operations that have resulted in such tragedies.
I hope we can see the end of it. One of these days.
Again, Lebanon hasn't collapsed entirely, but it's in a terrible state, and that's another one of those countries that have been targeted. Especially Hezbollah, in particular. Hezbollah is still there, but they have been weakened, and then the main target remains Iran. I mean, that's the one that's really kind of the great prize that Netanyahu and his people have been after for decades and decades. But I think that's one that they can't take, and if they really try to take it, it may, that's where they may finally find that they tried to bite off more than they can chew.